and now Washington State, which is really just incredibly regrettable. I cannot believe how much bad cosmic energy is being wasted out there. So for years, and not surprisingly, particularly in Seattle, there's a very viable, extremely supportive marijuana use community out there. And the polling out there is quite high. It's not in the 60 percentile, but it's in the mid-50s to low 50s consistently. And so there's a classic example of grass tops versus grassroots, what's going on out there. It's a grassroots group called Sensible Washington. And they don't have any money, they don't have any backing, they have a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of innovation, and they have rightness on their side. They want marijuana legalized in the state of Washington. So they've tried to put it on the ballot a couple of times. They failed to get it on there. If they had resources, nobody doubts they would get on the ballot, and there's a very good chance they'd probably prevail. But the big money sits on the sidelines in the last 2 cycles. This time around, the money, in this case Peter Lewis's, has found its way through the American Civil Liberties Union to the Washington Civil Liberties Union, who now has an initiative proposed, and the ballot language has been accepted, to legalize marijuana in Washington. And it will largely do so. And it's something that most of us who want to see these reforms can readily support. However, they did something, going back to this example I mentioned earlier about not having the stakeholders themselves involved in the process, and not getting the buy-in, the political buy-in you need from the very people you purport to be representing. So out in Washington, one of the components of this initiative, using again this term political triangulation, is that in Washington, they included in the language a provision that will have a per se standard of 5 nanograms in your blood or urine or hair for intoxication. Without going into the technicals of toxicology or pharmacology, virtually every single medical marijuana patient, for which there are tens of thousands of them registered card-carrying ones in the state of Washington, virtually every one of them, if they use marijuana within a 24-hour period of time, they will almost certainly fail a test, and they would be charged with intoxication and driving impaired, even though without getting into it, whether or not you are impaired with 5 nanograms in your body, just a separate discussion. So now the reform community, which is large and dynamic and energized, they put on the biggest marijuana rally in the world. Jack and I have spoken there to hundreds of thousands of people in front of us. This year they did a 3-day festival and had over 300,000 people attend. And so that group, that core group in Seattle now, is protesting and committing their money and their rhetoric and their energy to fight the ACLU. And probably the most valuable course I ever took here at UMass was a mediation course. And so the follow-up down at Harvard, that's one of my skill sets. And so I've been trying for the last 6 months to try to marry 2 natural allies. 2 groups that want marijuana legalized, who are right now fighting at each other like they're alpha males fighting over a kill. And it depresses me. It makes me so frustrated. So in social movements, we can be our own worst enemies, I promise you. I hope we're going to get the buy-in necessary in Washington. They're not going to change the language. They're not going to pull the initiative. We're going to have to make the best promises possible to that community that when this passes, and it will pass in 2012 or it will pass in 2014, it doesn't matter. We're not going away, those of us that are reformers and those of us who consume cannabis. Prohibition's going away. We're not. So we're in this to every single election cycle till it's over. So in Washington State, in 2012, there's a very good opportunity to pass a legalization initiative. But it cannot happen if the stakeholders in the state are fighting against those who have put up the money and are going to run the ads and be on the TV commercials. And so these initiatives are fraught with both great potential to change the laws and can divide us as an otherwise completely unified community. Or it's another example of what happens when money's put on the table. A lot of money's put on the table. All of a sudden, people who have been natural allies for 20 years, who've been in the trenches for years, all of a sudden find themselves at each other's throats. And yet they both want the same effing thing. Amazing. So the lessons learned and the changes sought to make this amalgam of grassroots and grass tops work better in the future, to hasten the end of cannabis prohibition. I mean, is 74 years not long enough? One is the Uber money, clearly, as I've already alluded to here, has to work with the grassroots folks and has to get the natural buy-in from them. Otherwise, they're just defeating themselves and passing legislation that many of us, literally as reformers, I mean, if I was a Massachusetts voter in 2008, I surely would have voted, absolutely, for the decriminalization ballot. But I probably would have done so allegorically here with my fingers over my nose. Because I knew at its core it was a really just poorly worded initiative that could just as well ill affect as many people as was going to help. And certainly, just to stay on that subject matter, because of the way that it was written, we now have dozens of police chiefs and prosecutors in the state who are making a lot of mishigas about the fact that people get busted, they get the cannabis taken away from them, they're supposed to pay a $100 or $200 fine, and then nobody's paying the fine. And they're complaining that the law didn't allow them the ability to write bench warrants for that. That's actually true. That's actually true. And we would have, because at normal we only have 600 lawyers. I think we would have caught that kind of stuff and would have proffered an initiative that would have acknowledged that, of course, police, when you caught somebody and they don't pay the fine, you can send the bench warrant out, just like if you don't pay a speeding ticket or if you don't pay a parking ticket, that you can get these fines tracking you. You're not just going to stiff and walk away. So the Uber money would be great, particularly considering that many of them are themselves cannabis consumers who are just so afraid to come out of the closet themselves, even though they are the biggest funders of reform. They put up tens of millions of dollars. But to get them to come up in front of a microphone and talk in the first person about why they use marijuana, why they want the laws to change, almost impossible. But can you imagine women getting the right to vote, blacks getting the right to vote, gay and lesbians achieving so much in my lifetime? If somebody just got up here and sort of spoke analytically and aloofly about why we should change the laws, not about why they have a grievance against their own government. Some years ago, there was a popular TV radio show in Nevada. There was a group trying to legalize marijuana in 2004 there. It had a $7 million budget. But again, I mean, how this comes to be, all of the focus and polling group data going into that indicated not more than 48%. Not more than 48% of people supported legalizing marijuana. Yet the group still moved forward and tried to pass something, and it came in at 42%. It lost, decidedly. But at one point, to make my point here clearer, during this interview on this radio TV show, one of the individuals from this particular organization was being really grilled by pretty much the #1 political reporter in the state for the biggest paper and the biggest radio station. very aggressive guy, very funny, very real. Can't BS this guy. And so he's asking him, all right, so you guys, you don't live here. You don't have any grassroots. Nobody asked you to come here and spend $6 million. You don't have an organization, you don't have a chapter, you don't have like a... So why are you doing this? Oh, well, we're doing this because we want the government to be better. The guy says, well, so let me ask you, do you use marijuana? The guy goes, well, no, I don't use marijuana. And the guy goes, so let me get this straight. You're in this state, you're raised millions of dollars, you're doing all of this, you don't smoke marijuana yourself. Have you ever been busted for it? The guy goes, no. He goes, you ever been drug tested? He goes, no. He goes, why are you doing this? And he goes, because I really believe in good government. And the guy literally almost snorted out his, he laughed so hard. Because it's just so disingenuous. We're in this to win it. And we need a wide rainbow of colors and partners to make this happen. So one of my great laments about drug policy reform is we're too white and we're way too male. And we can never reform these laws. We will never reform these laws as long as white waspy guys like me are the people who are generally leading this charge. I'm the 8th director of NORML in its 40 years. There'll be a 9th director, I promise, and she will be great. Because it's crucial. And it's crucial that we have partners like LEAP and non-drug consuming partners from the religious community, from the business community. And this past couple of years we started the NORML Women's Alliance. It's terrific. We've now started the NORML Seniors Alliance. It's almost too fun. It's almost too fun, as a couple of weeks ago holding an event at a Miami Jewish center filled with 70, 80, 90-year-old men and women who were dying to hear about medical marijuana and how much fun was had that night, particularly afterwards, and how much was learned by people 20, 30, 40, 50 years older than those of us who were involved in organizing. And how often do you hang with people who are 20 or 40 years older than you? Marijuana can do remarkable things. The Colorado initiative to legalize marijuana is underway right now. And again, I'll use this as an inside baseball of what's going on at the moment, which is very frustrating. Some big money's been put up by the characters I've mentioned. These signatures are being gathered, and during a conference call last week, despite the fact that 85,000 signatures are needed, 63 have been gathered, well on the way. The big money just simply says when a new tranche, a couple tens of thousands of dollars are needed to get those other signatures, they just basically said the other day, nah, we don't, count us out this time. There is no other funding. Well, okay. And it just feels so trite, so uncommitted. And so in Colorado, too, we are in this situation where the citizens poll very high regarding legalizing it. Big money's been put on the table, and now it's not moving forward because that big money, just for a completely random, unarticulated reason, is stepping back. And, many of us say, hey, who could put up $5, $10, $20, $30,000? It's a lot of money. I'm not great at math. I certainly didn't get a degree here in math. But when you're worth $6 to $8 billion, and an entity that you claim that you really care about, that you've been working with, something that's really important to you, and is this close to actually happening, and as Jack mentioned, we're now at the 50 percentile in these Gallup polls of marijuana wanting to be legalized by the citizens and doctors groups coming on board. We are so close, and yet they just simply pull back. And the percentage of the money needed, which I'll use a round number, 100,000, is like when you walk out of here today and someone says, can you donate a dime or a nickel for something today? We can all do that. We can all reach in our pocket and give somebody a nickel who asks for it, who needs it. So when these billionaires don't fund these things, or half fund them, and so both in Washington and Colorado, despite the fact that those states' citizens are polling so high for legalizing marijuana, the actual organization behind the scenes is frightening. I presume it's all going to come together, and usually it does, but boy, so much harder work than is necessary. And we have to diversify this funding source from these two people. This is a pretty small petri dish of two funders out of 330 million Americans are the ones who have put up the money for all of this reform. So I mentioned earlier, Prop 19 broke that mold, finally, with a man in a wheelchair, Richard Lee, the guy who owns Oak University. He put up most of his net worth, probably $3 or $4 million, to get the signatures on the ballot, get the organization running, and then that big money literally sat on the side all last summer and didn't want to get involved. And then when we were still polling in the upper 50s, low 50s, upper 40s, meaning it had a chance to pass, only then did some of these big donors come in with $200,000 or $300,000 checks in the last 2 weeks of the campaign. In one case, there was a New York Times or Wall Street Journal article that went out and quoted from some of the big donors in drug policy reform. They were asked, wow, these people have brought the ball all the way to the line. You are known to have put up tens of millions of dollars in states like Nevada and others that were like total losers. This is on the cusp of winning in the most important state strategically to reform marijuana laws, and you're not willing to put any money up. And they literally said from their penthouses overlooking Central Park, and this is a direct quote from one of them, I think we'll let the Californians stew on this, unquote. They're sadists. Why would somebody literally tell these people that have gotten so far along in California, who have the ability to reach into their pocket and pull out that proverbial nickel, do they want marijuana legalized or not? Do they want to end the arrest of somebody every 38 seconds for marijuana? Do they want to remove the pillar of drug prohibition in this country or not? So we can get focused on health-based reform. Harm reduction is the doctrine. However, Prop 19 did identify a number of young billionaires. Many who came out of Facebook, came out of MySpace. Is there still a MySpace? Somebody must have made money off of it. One of the original creators of Intuit, and a number of others, who for the first time ever, they'd never been to a normal meeting, they didn't show up on our database, they came out of the ether, and they plunked down hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we know they're good for it. And we've got to get them reinvigorated. And we've got to get, since they're young, most of them are between 28 and 35 years old, they get it. So when Normal talks to them about the fact that we've got 350,000 people on our Facebook page or 40,000 Twitter followers, they get it. Their eyes open wide. I still have to explain to many funders in drug policy reform and many of my own board of directors what the hell Google is. Okay? Let alone try to explain to them what Foursquare is, or explain to them just how amazing the opportunities are for us to move reform forward in ways that were not even conceivable 10 years ago. If Normal had to mail to everybody on our Facebook page today, we'd be out of business tomorrow. If we had to mail them a postcard. But I could leave here tonight, in an hour conceive of something, hit that button and tell at least 350,000 people on our Facebook page, 850,000 people on our Legalize It Causes page. So when you add up all of the groups that NORML has control over, listservs or whatnot, it's 1.2 million people. So we've now identified these young dot-com billionaires and got to keep diversifying this funding base. And also, too, it would be helpful if that funding base wasn't entirely from the Democratic side. Because for those of us who work on K Street, you have to deal with this insanely partisan, painfully partisan capital in Congress. If you are funded entirely by somebody like a George Soros or Peter Lewis, and you're trying to deal with Republicans, they look at you and they say, all right, I hear you. But they see standing in back of you the man that is putting up more money to take their party down than anybody else they're dealing with. So inherently, they kind of see you as an organ of that individual or their causes. So we need to be totally diversified. We got to be hippies and yippies. We got to be yuppies and professionals. We have to have the entire range. And our funding should reflect that as well. I mentioned earlier the medical cannabis industry. There are approximately 2,300 dispensaries in the United States, generating millions of dollars a year, both in profit and in taxes and fees and licenses. There's a new group that's founded called the NCIA, the National Cannabis Industries Association. I suspect if they can stay together, because right now it's an amalgam of medical marijuana dispensaries, I think there's a reason why they didn't call it the National Cannabis Medical Industries Association. I think they're looking forwardly, recognizing that these people who are now selling medical marijuana hand over fist, from NORML's point of view, for every 9 marijuana smokers in the United States, 1 is a legitimate, bona fide medical consumer. So those people, those ganjapreneurs, they'd sure like to serve the other 8 of us who don't use medical marijuana. So that is well in play right now. And stakeholder groups like NORML, I can stand here and take the full blame that we have not raised $5 and $10 million a year to do this. Now, when the Board of NORML hired me in 2005, first thing I told them is, I will clearly do everything I can to bring in more money than the previous year. Kind of just makes sense when you're running an organization. But I said, you're not hiring a fundraiser. I don't work 6-7 days a week for 80 hours a week because I want to ask people for their hard-earned money. And that's the great failing of most of our drug policy reform groups. We've got the passion, we've got the smarts, but not a one of us, either really as stakeholders, fully voiced, will put the money forward, like a Richard Lee, or have been able to raise that kind of money. So bless the groups that have done it. But again, they've all been conduits of 2 people's monies. It's a very, very undiverse, and I'm a great fan of Darwin. And that's not the kind of diversity a movement that's been going on for 40 years can, I believe, thrive off of. We need greater diversity in every sense of the word. So, that's the end of my remarks regarding the initiative process. Certainly we'll open this up for questions, not only about the politics of initiatives, but of course anything having to do with marijuana law reform, good, bad, or indifferent, marijuana's effect on the body, the history of it. I've been NORML's archivist as much as I've been one of its employees for 20 years. I've been there so long, I've been there pre and post-internet. And so for me, with great pride, and to give some of you a heads up, that in the ensuing years, particularly if you're a freshman, maybe you'll certainly see this come to be. And that is, out of the blue, I was contacted this year by the collections department here, particularly the W.E.B. Du Bois Center, and they specialize in trying to gather the collections of not only those who attended the university potentially, but notably for this particular center, for social justice movements, for things that you can archive from beginning to end. And so it's been my great want. I mean, Normal has this massive archives, relatively speaking. It's vertical. Only a couple of us really have access to it. I mean, it's open to the public. If you want to come to our offices in Washington, D.C., it's there. But from the time I got there in 1991, I always saw it as this massive untapped resource. So as we've moved into the internet age and scanning and document production and PDFs and word searches, it's now all possible. So the organizers of the collection have come to myself, my own personal collection, Mass Can Normal, which is the affiliate of Normal, which puts on the big Boston Freedom Rally every year. One of its principals, a guy named Dr. Keith Saunders, who wrote his dissertation and has been a real polyglot about marijuana in Massachusetts. Potentially, hopefully, Dr. Lester Grinspoon, who was a long-time faculty at Harvard Medical School and is, for many of us, our mentor intellectually. And so our hope is that the archive lands here. Beautiful graduate students will pile through hundreds of thousands of emails and letters and reports and see some of the things I've talked about here today, to see these disputes, the mediation processes I've talked about, and so that future generations can readily come to I presume, a UMass server and be able to pull down all of the information about what happened to marijuana. You know, I mean, for those, raise your hand if you could, who saw any of Ken Burns's PBS series on alcohol prohibition. Ken is an acquaintance. I had the pleasure of speaking to him before. He graduated from Hampshire College down the road. And he's blessed as a historian that he can tap into these archives about history, about alcohol prohibition that are now 70 to 80 years old. You know, the beginning of film and some early radio and people's voices. He or his kids, they will be able to tap into this massive primary resource from the very people involved. The prisoners. I was on a radio show the other night with a former head of the DEA who for the umpteenth time insisted that not only does nobody get arrested in the United States for marijuana, no one gets arrested for marijuana in the United States. But of course, then, ergo, nobody goes to jail for it. And I had just got done dealing with a group of people who have organized a group called, and I'll commend this webpage to you, Life for Pot. How simple can it be? There are 8 people, 8 of our brothers and sisters, brothers, we're all guys, who are serving life in jail for marijuana sales or cultivation. Not for possession, that should be given. And yes, they were rather industrious boys, but you know that marijuana doesn't get to your dorm magically. Somebody takes risks to grow it and to get it across the continent usually, or across town. And so, this archive, hopefully, will be something, well, there'll probably be some sort of public event around it, and probably hopefully come back and we'll have panel discussions around it, and all that good stuff that universities do. But for me, it's the permanency. It's the ability to tap into that information. So I'm really just overwhelmed that out of the blue, my alma mater called up and said, we want that archives. So probably in the next couple of months, I'll find myself with a very large van, a whole bunch of boxes, and hopefully in the next 9 months to a year, we'll do something back here on campus, and in a more conservative way about this archives and how important it is for this big, huge social movement. So with that, I'd entertain any questions you have other than to where to score some weed. I can't help you there. I could have 21 years ago in 5 minutes. No, I'm sorry, in 2 minutes. But now I'm just a happy visitor through the Happy Valley. Yeah, you've been patiently waiting.